times
Recording.
as that nitrogen was. And those other little elements, titanium, vanadium, chromium, magnesia, and iron, all of those aren't true elements, those are isotopes. Those things, those first three are the full tones. They make full spheres. But now it becomes elliptical with titanium, vanadium, and chromium. And on the other side, it's like when, like I said, if you wrap around your hand, the first wrap, really tight. You can't get much out of it. Second wrap, damn near can't see the difference of it. Third one, you start seeing hydrogen. The fourth wrap, you see carbon. I need a piece of paper or a rag and I can show you that twist. But in between each one of them, by the time you get, nature does not allow us in the silicone octave for there to expand out. But there is the same titanium, vanadium, chromium, magnesia, and iron that exists between aluminum and silicon. But nature doesn't allow us to unravel that. But now with the wave conjugations, we can. We couldn't do that before because we didn't know the angles of incidence that were necessary to open these things up. And you couldn't do that with the platonic solids because the platonic solids were averages and approximations. They, like I've said a number of times, you show me a real straight line in nature. If everything in the universe, everything is expressed in motion, all motion expressed in waves, all waves were curved. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the greater the action, the greater the reaction. The greater the reaction, the greater the resistance. The greater the resistance, the greater the curvature. Because the universe is based off of equanimity, which Einstein left out in his theory of relativity, the balancing side of the gravity was caused by electric force. Electricity is always seeking a higher pressure condition. It spins northeast, is trying to get to the center of an area, the center of a cone. But the next electric wave is coming, so it gets pushed out, and as it's pushed out, it gets to the vortices. And that's some on those pieces, those vortices. Now, instead of it spinning northeasterly, centripetally, it's forced to spin centrifugally, and it spins southwesternly. And it expands itself out, it decays, it keeps decaying until you get 4 magnetic waves that hit each other at 120-degree angles. At that point, they reconvert back into the electric field, and then they make their way back to their source again, whether it's the star, whatever star it came into. What happens when we get older? We expand at our equator, right? We get shorter at the top. Why? Because the electric force is pushing in and condensing, and the magnetism expands out at the equator. The electron field, the electrons, that's just discharged electricity, devitalized electricity, coming from the sun, coming from the earth. It's the waste product from it. But it hits our magnetic field, and then it gets pulled right back in and gets compressed again, and now it becomes electricity for the earth, and then it pushes itself right back out again at the equator. The equator is 5 miles wider than the poles. Electricity, Einstein left that out of his equation because he coupled electricity and magnetism together and didn't realize that electricity was the equal and opposite of magnetism. Electricity being the contractive field. You breathe in, that's a contractive thing. You breathe out, that's a magnetic thing, a radiative thing. But they use the term magnet as an attractor, but to magnify something means to what? Make it larger, increase the space. That's the work of radiation. That's what Walter Russell was talking about all those years. That's the work of radiation. It's the electricity between the things that pull them together. The Coulomb force that supposedly opposites attract and push each other away. If that was true, then hot air and cold air would seek each other out. They're the same substance, but just in a different state. One is they move in opposite directions from each other. Hot water and cold water move in opposite directions from each other. The reason two magnets seem like the North Pole is attracted to the South Pole, because if you had two rivers or two hoses with water coming out of them, and you pointed them at each other, what are they going to do? They're going to be pushing against each other. But they align to where the male enters the female and is able to come out. So they've been fooled by their senses. They've been fooled by their eyes and have missed the whole picture of it. Are you familiar with Khalil Gibran?
Yes.
He wrote a book, he wrote The Prophet, 1923, but he wrote another book called Sand and Foam. In that book, he told a story of a man who had been away from his family for 4 months working, and he was excited to come home, and as he was coming home, he knew that the mountain, when he saw the mountain, that he was close to home. So his five senses started having a conversation, and his eyes says, I see a mountain, I see a mountain, I see a mountain. And so the ears perked out and said, I don't hear a mountain. The nose sniffed and said, I don't smell a mountain. The tongue tasted the air, I don't taste a mountain. And the other four senses started speaking among themselves, and they came to the conclusion that there must be something the matter with the eye, because they couldn't perceive it. But all of these things, we've been misled just because we've been fooled by our senses. Our eyes see 0.05% of the entire electromagnetic wave. We're blind cosmically, but we judge everything by what we see. And they've done that with science for so many years. You look at E equals MC squared. That talks about expansion. It does not show how it's divided. You've never breathed in twice without breathing out. You breathe in and you breathe out. You charge and you discharge. So how is it that the breathing in, they're acting as if the universe is just expanding out, breathing out, and it's going to dissipate out, and they never include the contractive side of it, breathing in, because they were misled by Newton, who said everything moves in a straight line unless affected by something else. And we know that not to be true. But they built the entire two-dimensional plane, the Euclidean space that we live on, that we work on, that we try and define curved nature by two-dimensional space, and we never include the curvature, the breathing in. Like Alan Watts said, no one would be attracted to a Euclidean woman because she would just be straight, all straight lines. It's the wiggliness, it's the curvature that brings the balance. Everything has to have the balance. The electric side and the magnetic side. I can talk about it, but I can show you even better. If you can...
Can I stop you there? The concept of the periodic table, the way the periodic table conventionally is addressed, do they address these things as being isolated or intertwined?
They interact, but they feel that carbon will always be carbon, and it will have its half-life and keep breaking down, but it still be carbon. They don't understand that it unwinds and becomes nitrogen. Nitrogen unwinds and becomes oxygen.
So the periodic table, the conventional use of the periodic table, and what is this other gentleman's name again?
Walter Russell.
Walter Russell's version of the periodic table. How is Walter Russell's version of the periodic table perceived by people who study this?
Well, now everyone wants to use it. If you can go to in my book, there's a picture of Einstein reading Walter Russell's first book, second book, The Universal One. Because when Walter wrote this in 1926, he sent it out to 300 different universities and physicists. And one of the quotes that Einstein says on his deathbed, I should have spent more time reading Walter Russell's work. That's how, and now they're taking it under their wing. But remember the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887? They were trying to prove whether there was an ether or an effect of an ether, or the quintessence that everything came from. That used to be called the fifth element, that everything that from antiquity, everyone understood that something doesn't come out of nothing. It's like when you look at the air, it looks clear, but you change the pressure condition. The balance of the change of pressure condition, we call that condensation. It creates clouds. And you change the motion conditions, whether it's moving quickly or slowly, it's going to become snow, it's going to become rain, it's going to become hell. So everything comes down to just one of two forces. Either you're breathing in and filling up something, or you're pouring it out. But the scientists, they ignored Walter Russell's work because he didn't include any equations inside of it. He talked philosophically regarding how things behave in comparison to laying down and following some Newtonian or calculus writing. You know, he said he based things based on let's explore them naturally. And that's what I did with my book. Once what Walter Russell was missing, he didn't have the wave conjugations. He didn't have the mirror shapes, the all shapes. And that was because of a mistake that was made 6,000 years ago, maybe. They took the flower of life, which was that symbol. Mm-hmm. If you could go to my book, tcotlc.com, there's an example that I put in there on page 64. And I show the period, I show the element, the fundamentals. If you could possibly pull that up, Jamie.
What's that .com again?
tcotlc.com. You'll see in there the mistake that they made because they believed in straight lines, because the church was promoting the idea of straight lines. You just tap on right below there. You have download. No, just go to the center of the page and right above that, and you see initial public draft, just tap on it. And if you go to page 64, on the right side of the page, right there, on the left side of the page, you'll see the 5 Platonic solids. Now these, all of our axioms, all of our postulates have been built off of these things. This is what Euclid went down to Egypt and pulled these things together. Pythagoras worked on them. And these were the undisputed fundamentals of God that he used to build. If you tap onto the flower of life, Platonic solids things, it's going to take you to a video. Turn it, you don't have to have it. But it'll show you the flower of life that they took this from. But you'll see that instead of following the natural curvature of these 64 circles overlapping, they averaged the space where they met. And they invented straight lines.
Why did they do that?
Because they believed that the world was flat. They believed the world was flat at the time. And the church promoted. Pythagorean theorem comes off of this cube, a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
So they wanted to use all of these intertwining circles and create straight lines.
Because that's how they thought everything came down to, straight lines. They thought the world was flat. And I was like, oh my goodness. They didn't open the flower properly. So the next one would be the icosahedron.
Now the flower of life, it's very, very old. The concept is very old. What was the origin of the concept?
It's the oldest symbol known to mankind. It's believed that it was Anki, the brother of Enlil, if you go by the Emerald
Sumerian
tablets.
text.
Yeah, the Sumerian text, that was the one that created mankind. Because if you look at mankind, and there's a point I want to make with it, I want you to stay on the book, go back to go to 134 on the book. And this is what that other gentleman being told me to do. He said, why don't you just take the pieces that make up the flower and put them together based on universal ratios. So if you, once you're able to pull it up,
164.
page 134. 134 in the book. So this is the juxtapose of the mistake they made. Yep, just tap right onto that. Yep, just tap on it. Now, this was made by David Johnson, one of our programmers, Argos Fuel. So if you go to the far left and tap on that, this is, I took 4 of those triangles. And wow, and you can scroll around. This is what happens when 4 bubbles meet. This is the negative space where they can't touch each other. This is hydrogen. And as I was saying, electricity is always trying to get to the center of that triangle, but it gets pushed out. And now you see it has 4 contractive poles, which is the electric poles. Just go around it from like horizontally, yeah. It has 4 contractive poles because electricity is seeking a higher pressure condition and forcing it in, where magnetism is seeking a lower pressure condition and spun out. So the vortices, those tips, that's the magnetic field, that's where they begin. But it has an equal attractor and an equal amount of repulsion. So if you go to what happens when 8 bubbles meet, they gave me the patents to that. I called that the tetrahedron. This is
So this is the negative space in between 8 bubbles.
8 bubbles. This is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, and you can scroll around.
And this is ignored when they're concentrating on straight lines.
Completely, because this, if you look from the top, I haven't violated anything. It fits perfectly inside of there. But this is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, but you'll notice it has 8 contractive poles, but it only has 6 magnetic poles, 6 vortices, so it has a greater electrical potential than a repulsion. So maybe this is the strong nuclear force, and the previous one was the weak nuclear force. So I was like, okay. I called this the Huntian after my son. So I was like, what happens when 6 bubbles meet? If you'll go to the one right in the center. Now you see that it has these huge bubbles, fast moving, but there's 6 strong spheres that's going around this, but the greater attractor has grabbed the 2 weaker attractors. And this looks just like a photon, and guess what? It has 30 poles. What is the speed of light? 299,752,400 something. They rounded off to 300 million kilometers per second squared. But if you look at it from the top, you'll see that I violated